microphones if you're not speaking. During virtual only or hybrid meetings, commissioners joining virtually and who are eligible to vote must have their cameras on for the duration of the meeting for purposes of meeting quorum. For those attending via telephone, you can mute and unmute your microphones by dialing *6. The chat box will be monitored to address any technical or procedural questions during the meeting, but should not be used for the meeting discussion. Commissioners should use the raise your hand function on the top toolbar to be recognized during the commission discussion. Assigned presenters may share their screens using the share content box above. And as way of information, we'll be holding a public comment period. In order to be recognized, please use the raise your hand function, and each public commenter will have up to 3 minutes for public comment. But again, as we stated earlier, I don't believe we have any pre-registered public commenters, so we'll likely bypass that. Staff will signal to the speaker once time is up, and then that should be it for now. And I wanted to thank everyone again, and I'll turn it over to Gary.
Let me turn my mic back on. So, I think the first item of business, well, maybe I should first mention that, Jill will not be joining us because she's vacationing in some exotic place in the world. Can't remember what country she's in today, but she'll be back for our next meeting. So I'd like to go ahead and go on to the subject of our the minutes that Marco prepared of our last PRC meeting. And I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at those, hopefully. But I would like to move that we approve those minutes and ask if there's anyone who would be willing to second that.
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. I guess all in favor, raise your hand. Okay.
All right, that passes.
Okay, I think that passes. And we have no public commenters. And so without further ado, I'll welcome Jen Souls, who's the Natural Resource Specialist for Park and Rec. And then also she'll be speaking to us along with Gerald Brandt, who's the APS Staff Liaison to the PRC. And they're going to be talking about current and future projects that APS and DPR will be working on. And they'll, I hope, give us time for some questions. And I'll ask them whether, in terms of questions, would you like us to wait until the end? Or are you okay with us popping up with questions as you are doing your presentations?
So to the vice chair, I wanted to mention that we did receive a list of current and future project updates. I remember from APS. That is essentially the updated list of materials for the commission's review. So we had discussed is if there are any questions, if there are any discussion points specific to those, and I can share my screen with those items if you'd like. We can do so right now, and we do have, again, Gerald, and we also have Stephen Bernheisel from APS as well, if there are any questions that may be answered in real time. Otherwise, we can always share that information back to facilities and operations, and then we can potentially request having a presentation later on in the year. So if there's any questions or any discussion from commissioners, we can entertain that right now. And I'll share my screen with that material just so that folks can remember what it is that we're talking about here. All right.
So, yeah.
So again, it's the design and construction project status update. It includes information regarding the various projects. Again, there's some information here on Cardinal Elementary School, the Heights Building Phase 1, the Heights Building Phase 2. Those are that's the building in Roslyn associated with the HB Woodlawn and Shriver programs. The Career Center and its progress, the new building there. Barcroft Elementary School, HVAC renovation. And then there's a whole bunch of other projects related to renovations, vestibule, kitchen, amongst other projects that are going on throughout the various projects within the county.
Okay.
So if there's no discussion related to that, that's fine. We can always move forward with the second part of this discussion item, which is Jen Souls' presentation on the APS and DPR. Oh, I see Gerald has his hand up, actually.
So Marco, if anybody does have any questions or comments later on, I guess they can send them to Gary, and then Gary can send me an email, and I can reach out to Jeff Chambers, who's the director of design construction, and get the appropriate answer for you.
That'd be great. Yep.
Okay, great.
You can share them with me and with Gary if you'd like.
Okay, perfect.
And thank you, whoever did it, for preparing these materials. It was very interesting to look through all the different projects that you guys have on your plates right now, and there's a lot of them. But it looks like you're making really good progress with all of them. So
that's just the design and construction side of it. There's still the maintenance side that I deal with projects. So yeah, it's quite a bit of stuff going on.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thank you again for putting that together for us.
No problem. You're welcome.
All right. Without further ado, Jen, I'm going to share. Oh, never mind. I see Andrew has his hand up.
Yeah, I have a bit of a question because I'm kind of curious regarding the procurement policy that Arlington uses for construction or for remodels or things like that. Is it done with bids, or is it used more of the construction manager, general contractor process? Again, if this is not something you have up at this time, we could talk about it offline or later. I'm just a little curious regarding procurement.
So this is Steve Bernard. So I think with design and constructions projects, they're normally larger projects than the ones that Gerald and I work with typically. So I think they have lots of times their bond money, and I don't know every detail of how they, how they work. I know we all fall under Virginia procurement law or policy law, I guess, I believe it is. But anyway, I'm not sure on all the details on design and construction's procurement. For instance, especially with something like the Hopper Center on Walter Reed, it's a big bomb project.
Thank you so much for the answer on that. I was just a little bit curious, but I'll do some more research myself. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. All right, without further ado, Jen.
All right, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Souls. I'm Arlington County's Natural Resource Specialist, which means I work in our Natural Resource Unit with Alonzo and Sue. It's a small unit located in Parks and Natural Resources, located within DPR. If people have questions, I may or not see you raise your hand or something, but feel free to do that during the presentation. But I do have a slide at the end that just says questions. So you'll definitely have a chance to ask if you have any. All right, I think we're, yeah. I just wanted to review, I think almost everyone on this commission is familiar with what an invasive species is, which is a non-native species that is causing a problem. So it's not just something like a tulip or an apple tree that may not be native to the area, but it's something that's negatively impacting the economy, the environment, human health. For us in our natural areas in Arlington, this is pretty much was our number one problem to deal with. And we've got that well underway, but definitely, a big challenge. Did you hear me on that last slide?
Yes.
Okay. My mic sometimes cuts off.
Yes.
Yes.
Again, I think this information should be familiar to everybody on the commission, but Arlington County has been doing invasive management for more than 20 years now. Originally started as sort of a volunteer project and then supporting volunteers and then a part-time position, then a full-time position, and now a full-time and a half kind of, or almost 2 full-time positions. With that work over the last 20 years, we've also been able to get more than half of our land. We sort of tipped over to more than half the land is in management, and we'll just keep working our way forward on that. The county owns about 540 acres of natural land, so that's forests primarily. There's a little bit of meadow, very few acres of meadow, primarily forests. And this is what we, Arlington County, own. This is not what schools own. This is not what National Park Service owns. This is not what VDOT owns or Northern Virginia Regional Park Association. So this is our land. We have been sort of following we devised a plan for this. I think the first few years were like, oh, let's do this, let's do that. And then eventually like, okay, we have to have a plan. And basically it was to go to the highest value ecological areas first, work on those, to use all methods of control, mechanical control, chemical control, biological control, to engage the public, engage volunteers, and that's been crucial. We get over 2,000 volunteer hours a year. Well over 2,000 volunteer hours a year supporting this program, working on early detection, rapid response, which is where we try to tackle invasive species before they become established and spread widely. The program, as I say, now has a dedicated annual budget of $100,000, annual budget a year, which is dedicated funding, and then 2 staff people. For the last several years, we really appreciate we've gotten additional one-time funding, which we got last year and this year, that's really been able to kick us forward. We're doing parks now I thought we would never get to, or certainly wouldn't get to for 5 or 10 years as we inched our way forward. And we are not the only people doing invasive work in the county. There's other work that's being done through parks development projects. When they redo a park, often there's funding for invasive management. Department of Environmental Service does invasive management, usually as part of a stormwater or stream resilience project. And then we've been making a lot of progress also through the Arlington Neighborhood Program grant that is currently paying for work at Douglas Park and Thrifton Park. So that's been great. All right. As I said, natural land is not just on Arlington County property, it's also on APS property. APS has about 30 acres of natural land, and they want to be good stewards of it. So these are like the little chart on the one side shows where the majority of the natural land that APS owns is. This isn't all the chunks of natural land, but these are the bigger chunks. And then they have, volunteers out there doing work as well, trying to steward these lands. Any questions so far?
The $100,000 a year that you mentioned, I assume that's for expenses other than salary.
Oh, yes, that's the contractor budget.
Yeah.
So there's the staff salaries. We are making collectively more than that.
Yeah.
And then, and that's the contractor budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
All
this
right.
isn't all the APS acres, just the natural lands owned by APS.
Yes, that's correct. So just like, for example, Barcroft Park has an area with soccer fields and a community center and things like that, and then an area that's wooded. These are the natural areas on APS property, the biggest chunks of that acreage. So the majority is found at Claremont, and then the combined sort of Gunston Oak Ridge land, and then it just sort of drops down from there.
Thank you.
As I said, volunteers are already at work on APS land. They have volunteers doing all sorts of work, not just invasive work, obviously. They have volunteers helping to maintain pollinator gardens, planting trees, and then all the volunteers who do work with the educational part of the program as well. But, for my focus, it's what's happening outside the building. They have volunteers helping prune their trees. So they've got a lot of volunteers working on their property, and they value those volunteers, including the volunteers who are working to manage invasives. As recently, I would say in the last 6 months, I've met twice or more than twice now, several times with Steve Bernheisel to sort of clarify how volunteers can best work on this property. And APS is drafting a letter that will sort of outline the process and be just a general letter of support that volunteers interested in doing this kind of stewardship work can take to the principals or take to the PTA landscaping committees. Most volunteering on APS is decentralized, so people go directly to the principal, and it's not through a central system. So I think sometimes our volunteers are hesitant to just walk in the door of a school, but this letter will hopefully give them a little more confidence reaching out to have a better partnership. And part of the reason, like I said, I've been reaching out to APS and working with them lately is because this is called for in the Forestry and Natural Resource Plan, which again, all of you should be aware of that beautiful 100-page plus document. And there are two items in particular that really sort of push this agenda forward. One is just to participate in partnerships for invasive management, and we're doing this not just with APS, but in July, we joined the National Capital Region PRISM, which is a partnership of all kinds of jurisdictions in the area. And then also one of the other items in the Forestry and Natural Resource Plan was to explicitly to work on our relationship so we can better meet community objectives. And there's been stuff happening with trees and APS as well, but I'm not Vincent, so I won't speak to that. But I know they got a grant and they're doing a lot of work with trees and APS too. So when we were meeting with APS and talking about things, APS doesn't have the resources and the knowledge and the background to do a lot of invasive management. So did you hear that last thing? My mic, I think.
Yes, we did.
Okay. So again, APS is, we're trying to support them as they look at this. And while you guys saw that list of places that APS has natural land, we thought that the place to start and to encourage them to start that we could support the best were places where the natural land crosses over. The forest is like there's a line through the middle of the forest, and one half belongs to Jamestown and one half belongs to Jamestown Elementary. And so we wanted to sort of focus our work there. On all the sites where there is natural land crossing that both sides of the jurisdiction, Arlington Parks DPR already has contractors that work there. In some cases, they've been at work there for years. Some cases they just started in the last year. And we also have a volunteer park steward working with master naturalists who's leading regular events at least a couple times a year to do stewardship work. And so those sort of were sites that were like, well, this is where we want to prioritize because APS can't tackle all of this. So we got some quotes for invasive management at some of these parks, or these school sites, I should say. And APS recently added a vendor who can do invasive management to their, portfolio of vendors, as it were. And they are planning to fund some invasive work at Jamestown and part of Claremont in this coming year, assuming the snow does not eat up all their money. And then they expect to follow up work at those two sites next year as resources allow. So that's been a big step forward, I think.
Well, that's great news for me to hear. That's for sure, as the park steward of Jamestown.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Gary, for those of you who don't know, is the volunteer working at Jamestown Park and Jamestown Elementary.
Yeah. And I have to say, I can't say enough good things, not only about, the Park and Rec's folks' support of my work there, but also APS's support. I've had just incredible, enthusiastic support from the faculty at the adjoining elementary school, Jamestown Elementary School, and we've had lots of fun bringing the students down to help us plant pollinator gardens and taking them on bird walks and things of that sort. So it's just been a wonderful relationship. And again, I can't say enough good things about the folks there.
Yeah, I know at Claremont, the park, there are two different people at Claremont, but I know that they've done some like on like an Earth Day or Green Week event. They've taken students down into. They've taken
It
students down
just
into,
cut out. I'm sorry.
yeah, sorry. They've taken students from Claremont down into Barcroft as part of their Earth Day events and things like that. So I think it's been one of these things where there's a real value to both sides in working together. And that's generally what I've heard from the volunteers, that obviously the plants don't know what side of the line they're on, and what's on one side crosses over to the other. And then there's this opportunity to do increased engagement and collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It would be wonderful to see if we can talk a good number of other schools besides Jamestown into creating pollinator gardens or vegetable gardens, whatever it is that they would like to have some support with, because it's just a great opportunity to provide instructions to the students on our native plants and wildlife. So I've been talking with Gerald about doing that, and he's come up with a handful of the schools that are interested in pursuing that. So I'm going to be following up with Gerald on that. I think you're still muted, Jen.
Just
okay.
I know we provided some plants to a student doing planting some native plants at Oak Ridge Elementary in the last year as well.
Great to hear.
I think that's all right. And so then the other thing that we are having conversations about, and this again is a sort of that forestry natural resource plan that said we should work better together, had a number of bullets, and I'm not going to read them all out, but one of them was to explore conveyance. And this is something the county and APS have done before. This is, in this picture, this is Zachary Taylor Elementary School, and then Zachary Taylor Park, and that sort of like curved chunk of land right behind the elementary school used to be part of APS property and now is part of DPR property. So that's an example of a place where we've done conveyance to make that parkland that can be managed as part of the park rather than a forest the school doesn't have the capacity to manage. So we are having.
You're muted again, Jen. Sorry.
Yeah, I swear my hands are not touching that. So we're having some conversations and looking at some additional potentials for this. Nothing has been decided. It's all still, in the discussion stage, but this is something we are also exploring.
Mm-hmm. Is both APS and DPR pretty comfortable with the way things have gone at Zachary Taylor?
As far as I'm concerned, we are. I'll defer to Steve or Gerald. I think it'll be Steven from the APS side of
Steven,
things.
I think you're also muted. Sorry. Yeah, you're good now.
APS is real pleased with Taylor too. In fact, I think that's one of the sort of models that we're maybe trying to use for other locations, but there's always details that make each location different, and numbers of folks are involved in all the decision making and process, I guess, to convey land.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But yes, we feel Taylor worked very well, I think.
Good to hear. Okay. Okay.
And so that's it. So if anybody has questions that you didn't get to ask.
I see Alex's hand is up.
Yes. Hi, Jen. Thank you very much for this presentation. I'm very interested to learn about this, particularly because this has been bubbling up at the school where my son goes to, Campbell Elementary. There's some efforts that have been bubbling up within the school about working and expanding the preservation of some of the trees and forests around the edge of the school. There's a club that's being formed right now within the school as well. And I would love to learn more about how we could support that. I know that whenever this has come up before through the PTA, it is often run aground because there's a lot of confusion about where the boundary lines are and who owns what. And this seems like the sort of question that could be worked out by moving up to your level and the staff level, so we can figure out, who can do what and where, and then move on from there, because that seems to be where a lot of the interest has stalled out in the past.
Yeah, and I will say that the Arlington County maps are publicly available. Some of the maps I showed in my presentation, like everybody has access to see where the property line boundaries are. If you just click on it, it'll say APS or it'll say Arlington County for every parcel. So that's certainly, like, I'm happy to answer those questions if they send us an email. Stephen or I can send you guys a map showing you where the property lines are. But or if you just send me an email after this, I can do that.
I can get you from the school perspective. It doesn't say all the land around the school, but I have a kind of a tricky 11 by 17 color image that shows like a satellite image with the property lines on it. So I'd be happy to get that over to you.
That would be terrific. Thank you.
I have a question regarding whether there have been any projects on APS property involving things like creation of rain gardens or other stormwater mitigation, landscaping efforts, things of that sort.
I'm going to defer that over to Steve. I know that there are because I've seen them, like, at every new facility, but I'll turn that over to APS.
Right. So there are, and so at newer facilities, as they're built, or if they have major renovations, there's normally funding and requirements that force APS to put more of that in. There's been other locations, smaller projects, where either school groups or we've, from maintenance, for instance, have done a little bit ourselves in trying to just help erosion and that sort of thing. Oak Ridge comes to mind. I know there was some work at Escuela Keep. It was before, when it was Arlington Traditional, where we tried to collect rainwater, and we had a good success for a while. But I think the families that were most involved with it then moved on as their children moved on, and it wasn't it didn't continue with the same enthusiasm once the families had gone,
Yeah.
Anyway, not that we shouldn't still try and do what we can do. Like I say, I think Gerald helped, and I worked on some projects both in the front and the back of Oak Ridge to reduce erosion and try and improve looks a bit. And I think that was fairly successful. They were smaller sort of projects, but they worked pretty well.
Okay, thank you.
Has maintenance been an issue with those?
No, they were just no, not with those. So that's one that there's an agreement form. If there's going to be any significant infrastructure, and like a school group's trying to do it, there's a form that they need to sort of explain the situation and basically what it gets approved. And what it's saying is that the maintenance services from the schools aren't trying to take on more maintenance responsibilities. So what we'd look forward to is something that would be a low maintenance item, and then if it wouldn't be kept up over time, everyone would be in agreement that it would be, disposed of or dismantled or whatever would have to happen to it if it wasn't maintained. I can think of a number of things that were well intended, but after 30 years, they become not usable anymore, and we're not able to go rebuild those back like the way they were 30 years ago. So we'd like everyone to know up front that conceivably they would just be disposed of, perhaps. Something like that happened at Abington with a sort of pavilion that was in the back of the property against the park.
I ask because at on one side of Campbell there are a couple of what look like they're rain gardens, and at least one of them is clearly no longer being maintained. The fence around it is falling down, and there are invasives and whatnot starting to work its way in, and I don't know what's going to happen to the one that's adjacent to it. So I was just curious as to whether maintenance is an issue with these.
It is, and we'll have to look at the one. Gerald might be. I think Gerald and I both are familiar with some of the projects there that were tried to eliminate standing water and that sort of thing, or try and make it more manageable if we weren't eliminating it. Yeah, we'll have to look. We'd be happy to look at it with you or anybody from Campbell there.
Great, thank you.
Can I add a couple things to that? So those two areas, we put those in maybe 20 plus years ago.
That long, okay.
Yeah, so there are underground springs in that area. And so that area was always wet, and it would run all the way to the wood line and then down towards the creek. But that area was always saturated. So we spent, I don't know, took many years and many Band-Aids, but we finally got, the water somewhat under control. Unless we get a lot of rain. I know sometimes the center of the field, it still gets pretty wet. But yeah, those were they were installed for the underground springs. And we actually there was I don't know, she was a master gardener, but she was trying to start a business. And so she got the school involved in it. But like I said, it just, the maintenance has fallen back on it, and there's, the parent groups that were there are gone, and it's been just overgrown for the last several years. And
it seems like the nature of working on school property is when if you're dependent on parent enthusiasm, the kids move on, and they move on to a different school.
Right. Well, that's it. You get
5
or 6 years out of them, and then it's the next group isn't as rambunctious or gardeners. So, and we just don't have maintenance staff. I mean, the grounds crew, you have 6 guys. It's just, you've got 40 buildings. It's hard to maintain.
And their grounds, the name of their team is Grounds, but realistically, the grounds is probably a very small amount of what they do. They do all sorts of logistics for the schools and other work that doesn't even relate to grounds, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I can testify that any sort of gardened area needs regular routine maintenance. You just can't stop weeding. I did put the property line in the chat. You, Alex, if you want to.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can get that to you tomorrow, Alex, a graphic.
Okay. Now, any other questions for Jen or Stephen?
I'd just like to say Jen's been real helpful and encouraging, I think, getting us kind of going in a good direction. And we kind of picked out kind of small projects to start with, but it seems like that was a good way to start and see if we can. That way we'll be able to keep up with more maintenance next year that supports those same projects, and then we'll see in the third year maybe they might not require as much for invasives, so maybe we could think about adding something else after that. But we wanted to start small and be positive if we could.
And I'll say, yeah, working with Steve has been great. Been really positive collaboration. Really appreciate them. I know this is not their main job, and they have enough to do, keeping the school safe and educating the students. So really appreciate them adding this onto their plate.
Yeah, and if I could just mention in that respect, just a further recognition that we appreciate that APS's primary focus is in the classroom, not out on the grounds. So we really appreciate all the efforts that have been made, despite that, to really help us make a great natural environment for the kids. So, and in terms of a good working relationship between APS and DPR, I think Jamestown is a perfect example of that. There's been a great working relationship there for a couple of years now, and it's great to watch different departments within the county working so constructively with one another. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you for this evening. I appreciate providing all the information. The charts were great, and if there are no other questions from anyone, Marco, do you see any hands up or anything? I don't.
I do
But
not.
missed something. Okay. Then we'll let you guys go. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again.
Thanks all.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
A lot of fun doing it as well.
Awesome.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
All right. So the next agenda item is the staff report. So I'll go ahead and speak towards that. A few things I'll mention. For those who weren't aware or have lost track of the project, Gateway Park was adopted by the county board at its December county board meeting. So we're really excited about that master plan and design guidelines moving forward. Gary attended for our commission. Not much detailed discussion. There was some discussion related to an overhead pedestrian bridge across the south portion of Langston Boulevard, and what will happen with that and how that may impact any future developments of sidewalk infrastructure or any other transportation type infrastructure in and around the park site. So the county board had a few questions related to that, but overall it went very well. And now, after the park master plan design guidelines, we begin what we call is the design development process. There will be an RFP out for those services coming up this year. And then we'll have a design team or landscape architecture team come in to work with our staff to get the detailed design figured out for the park, have further discussions with the community about certain elements that require further development. So it could be anything from wayfinding opportunities to public art and how that may be implemented within the park, or artistic design elements, depending on what we end up doing there. Some of the makeup regarding the other spaces or the common spaces within the park as well. So getting into the more nitty-gritty details, there may be one or two additional community engagement opportunities related to that within the next year. And then, of course, potential for naming the dog park as well within that park. So that may be another opportunity that the commission will take a look at as well. So just giving everyone an update on that project. Another update that Gary.
Yeah, I was just going to mention one of the very fortunate things about this project is that it already has a huge infusion of money, not out of the Arlington County coffers, but from the Arlington County giving up its exclusive access to observation deck. And now, and in return for that, the owner of the building where that observation deck is will now itself have exclusive control. And so in return for that, they were willing to make a very sizable donation towards the work for the Gateway Park project. And so that's nice to have that money available right now to get things started.
That is correct. That was something that was heavily discussed at the beginning of last year. And then, of course, the county board had to consider that contribution as part of an amendment to the project or to a site plan that was associated with that. So we received those monies, and that'll be actually moving up the project instead of it being phased. It would actually all come together all at once. So it's, we're really excited about having that opportunity moving forward after design development and once we get into construction. Are there any other questions related to Gateway Park? All right. Hearing none, the second item I wanted to update folks on is related to our joint Park and Recreation Commission and Sports Commission meeting that we have every year. So for this year, we've identified the date of Thursday, February 27th. That is actually the same day that typically the Sports Commission would meet on. So we will be overlapping on their meeting date. It'll be a hybrid meeting. But the expectation is for commissioners to be joining in person. We will be, and I just got this information today, we will likely be meeting at Lumber Run Community Center. That's the location that we had last year as well. And we'll be meeting likely earlier than our normal commission meeting time at 6:30 instead of 7 p.m. So once we have all of those details finalized, we will send all of that information back to you all, as well as the Sports Commission. We have a few meetings, or we have a meeting with the staff liaisons, as well as the chairs of both commissions to discuss these details a little bit further. I think the main topic for that meeting will be essentially the fiscal year 2026 budget. And that will be, I think, the main discussion, along with other potential topics that we'll be able to flesh out as the weeks go by. And then once we have, again, more information on that, I'll be sharing that with this commission. Greg Anseline and Tyler Remerau from our staff end for the Sports Commission will do the same, and we'll keep everyone in the loop with that. Any questions related to that meeting? Great. Any other questions related to the staff updates that were provided last week? Okay, great. Thank you.
Just wanted to ask one question since I'm starting to try to listen in for the Sports Commission. For the joint meeting, what are the expectations that this group should be coming to that meeting versus what should the Sports Commission be coming to that joint meeting?
I'm sorry, say that again.
So we want to have obviously a good discussion at that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you like this group to bring to the joint meeting with the Sports Commission, and what do you want the Sports Commission to bring to that meeting?
That's a good question. And by the way, this is Hamilton Humes. He's our, I guess, either our new or our Sports Commission liaison to this commission. So I wanted to introduce him as well to our meeting. So thank you for joining us. That is something I think that Gary and maybe John, maybe we should discuss further when we meet to see what potential topics or what potential ideas we would want to have conveyed during our joint meeting. Again, I think the main topic will likely be that fiscal year budget once it's released to the public, and then we have that discussion amongst the commissions. I think that'll be big. And then any other topics we'll likely flesh out further. But, Gary, I don't know if you wanted to speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, and as Marco mentioned, he and I will be meeting with John actually tomorrow afternoon, and we'll get a sense from John what he would like us to have on a list of topics for discussion between the two commissions. So once we have that meeting, then we can get back to all of you in terms of what's been suggested in terms of topics.
Mhm.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I also wanted to take the time to recognize another liaison to this commission, Eric Berkey, and I know Nia Bagley has joined us on several occasions from the Planning Commission, but I also want to recognize that Eric will also be joining us for these meetings, so I wanted to welcome him as well.
Great, nice to have him.
Hey, thanks, Marco. Thanks, folks. Won't say much other than happy to be here, happy to continue serving with Nia, and always look to her for lots of guidance and wisdom this year as our Planning Commission Vice Chair. Thanks, Marco.
Thank you. Gary, since we still have some time before our next item with Eleanor, maybe we can move forward with the commission member reports?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. It's a good idea.
So one thing that I will mention during other business, but I did want to address right now, is the 2024 Bill Thomas Park Volunteer Award. I'll get into more details during the other business section of the meeting, but I did want to mention that that is another reintroduced topic within this list. We'll be moving up when we'll be considering that award back to where we used to have it prior to the pandemic. So for the last few years, we've been recognizing folks during the October County Board meeting. We'll be going back to that recognition happening during May. That's what was happening prior to 2020. So we'll be going back to that schedule. Again, I'll speak in more detail later on during the other business section about that, but just wanted to at least provide a heads up on that.
Okay. If you could remind me who helped us with that last year.
That was Alex and Nelson. Thank you both.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. And I see on the agenda underneath the Bill Thomas Park Volunteer Award, the Crystal and Pentagon Cities Council, where we have a vacancy. And I think we also have a couple of other sites where we need representatives as well.
That's correct. I believe with this Crystal City one, I believe that was Shruti. So if anyone has any interest in joining that and providing any reports back to this commission, please let me know. Or Gary and Jill know. We can certainly put you in there for that. We also have a few site plans, new ones that have come on. Two in particular, the 2500 Wilson Boulevard project, as well as the 3130 Langston Boulevard project, which is at the former Walgreens site. So those are two projects that are coming on board now. If there's any interest now by commission members, please let me know, and we can always put you on that for that. Melissa, I see your hand is up.
Oh, yeah. Can I show interest for the Langston Boulevard one?
Sure.
All right. Thank you.
Great.
You mean the former Walgreens site? I'm very curious about the heck we're going to do with that space as well.
I agree. We're curious to see what happens.
Yeah. Any interest for
sports
20?
Field, maybe?
Daniel, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I'd like to do the Wilson Boulevard one if possible.
Great. Thank you. And then Gary, what I'll do is I will update our CPHD staff person on these projects just to let them know that we have Melissa joining in for Walgreens and David for 2500.
Great. Thanks for doing that. And thanks you guys for volunteering to help out with those. If you don't have any other ones that we need to beg for volunteers on, Marco, I thought I would mention my conversation with you about my interest in having a checklist of things to think about for those of us who are participating in the these SPRC reviews. I'm not necessarily super confident that, I have a good, thorough list of the various things we need to keep an eye open for as we're representing the commission in these hearings and reviewing the projects. And Marco mentioned that he thought that Shruti had actually at least had begun the process of putting something along those lines together. But before I asked anyone to devote any more time or effort to something like that, I wanted to ask you all whether having a checklist provided would be of benefit to you. And if not, then, I'm not going to ask anyone to, make the effort to put that together. But I know there are times when I'm sitting in on these SPRC meetings and I'm thinking, geez, I'm wondering if I'm missing something here that I should be, asking a question about or weighing in on or something like that. So anyway, I just wanted to run that by you guys and see if any of the rest of you might have an interest in having some assistance with that.
Melissa, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I am trying to remember. It might have been Jill. We
Yeah,
had this like chart list. Is this anyone else ringing a bell for this? Where it was kind of mentioned
That
things
that
you mentioned.
that
Yeah.
was my recollection. I remember we had a discussion about that at some point. I think it was maybe the middle of last year.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure if it was Jill and Shruti that were working on that or if it was someone else. But maybe Gary, we might want to just touch base with Jill when she comes back and see,
Okay.
what's ended up with that or if there's anything that needs to be developed. But I vaguely remember there was a discussion about that in the middle of last year.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds vaguely familiar. So, okay, I've just written a note to remind myself to check with Jill when she gets back from her trip on that. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Melissa.
Yep, I'm trying to lower my hands because you raise ignore. Okay, got it.
Okay.
Gary, did you want to mention your update related to the River House project?
Sure. Let me get that in front of me here. So the River House project, which is in Pentagon City, I imagine most of you are probably familiar with those big apartment buildings that were built back, I guess, in the early 60s. But there initially was a plan to add a fair number of housing units to that same property. So in other words, this isn't a renovation project where they're tearing existing buildings down. They're adding buildings to the existing buildings that will remain there. And we just learned last week at a hearing on this that they're planning to add 2,785 housing units, which will get the total number of units for that property up to 4,461. So that's a lot of people added to a neighborhood that's already fairly densely populated. And I can appreciate the importance of creating more housing, particularly affordable housing. But I'm wondering whether, at least in this situation, the additional residents that will be in that neighborhood are going to completely overwhelm the local parks in that neighborhood. There's only really one park of substantial size in that neighborhood. That's Virginia Highlands Park. And that park right now is, in my opinion, overused because there's just so many, there's so much demand for the athletic fields there. and the other amenities in that park. And if we're going to be adding, 4,000, almost 500 additional housing units to that neighborhood, I'm just not sure we're going to be able to keep up with that. Now, a little bit of good news that was announced at the meeting was that an acre will be added to Virginia Highlands Park. And they also talked in more detail about the green ribbon that will be established through the River House project area. The green ribbon is not really a park. It's sort of, as its name suggests, a pathway, albeit a relatively wide pathway, something like 25 to 30 feet wide, that will wind its way through. And they are committed to packing that with as much biophilia as they can. So that is a very positive aspect of this project. But again, I don't think adding just 1 acre to Virginia Highlands Park, or even the addition of the green ribbon, is going to make up for the added pressure of, a couple of thousand more people living in that neighborhood. So anyway, that's a concern I have for this project. And I don't know whether any of the rest of you who are assigned to any of these other projects have any concerns for your projects along the same lines. In other words, the density that's being created is just going to overwhelm the parkland that's available in that particular neighborhood. But that's something I thought I would mention tonight as a growing concern of mine for this neighborhood, especially since I have one, or at least maybe even two other large construction projects in that same neighborhood that are going to be pumping additional housing units into that neighborhood. So again, I think it's a very laudable goal to significantly increase the amount of housing available in Arlington. But I'm just a little concerned now that at least in this situation, in this particular neighborhood, we may have crossed the line into creating a situation where we're going to be underserving the residents there because we don't have adequate parks and recreation facilities available for them. So, okay, I guess I'll get off my soapbox on that.
I see Melissa's hand is up.
Yeah, I as a renter, I definitely tend to be more pro density because that helps out other renters. So I understand the concerns. My question is, these new buildings, a lot of them do come with recreational facilities either inside of them, like gyms, or even my old building had like a squash court or something inside, or pickleball, whatever they're calling it. And also like private land, like as in private tennis courts or whatnot. I'm curious if that would help offset that. Not that we want to have more closed off private land, but if they're going to be there anyway, would that help it? So I think it's a tough balance. We obviously want the ideal for everything, but I think given the legitimate housing crisis that's facing people like me who are renters, I would hesitate to just not have density when it is a legitimate problem. But I'm open to hearing more about that. But that's just my take on it. Yeah. Someone else has commentaries in their hand?
Yeah, I see Hamilton's hand is up.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about the need for increasing lower level housing for lots of people, because we've had problems getting enough housing and teachers and some other groups here in Arlington. And I liked your suggestion about, hey, what can the developers bring for recreational items or in their development plans themselves, and we definitely should pose that question. The other question, of course, is Long Bridge. Is that park area, can that be expanded anymore? Because Long Bridge is not that far from Virginia Highlands.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I will add that to my list of things to bring up with the developer. at our next SPRC meeting. Yeah, I haven't really thought about the Long Bridge facility.
And of course, speaking as a budget guy, adding 1 acre to Virginia Highlands increases Virginia Highlands by what percent? Because it's already how many acres? Because I think that'd be just a tiny increase if I guessing.
Yeah, it's not a major one, but every little bit helps. And to come back to Melissa's point about recreational amenities on the River House property, they do have tennis courts, and they said that they were hoping to build another indoor fitness center type facility. So hopefully that will come to pass. They haven't provided much details on that up to this point, but I think we're still pretty early on in the process. But maybe that's another thing that I can bring up at these meetings. Is okay. We don't have a lot of open space to work with, but are there opportunities for indoor recreational facilities in the basement of some of these buildings or something like that? Make a note of that. Okay.
See, William's hand is up.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what do the current residents of River House think about, the availability of green space? That would be a good data point from my view.
Mm-hmm.
And how do they feel about another 2,000 units and the impact? Do they walk over to the Potomac? It looks like from the map there's some pathways. What do they do? Just jog in the streets? I'm not sure, but I think that would be a good data point, is to talk to the current residents.
Yeah, I'll add that to my list of questions for them. That's a good question to ask.
So Bethany just shared with me that Virginia Highlands Park is approximately 20 acres.
So 5% increase is not exactly overwhelming. Excellent.
Yeah. At this hearing, there were many community members. I don't think they were River House residents. If so, they didn't specify that. They mostly seem to be folks that have homes on Arlington Ridge, immediately above, I guess, to the west of the River House property. And they were absolutely irate over the increased density. I suppose not unsurprisingly. And they were also very frustrated that now there's a plan to build 2 22-story buildings that, of course, they're going to have concerns about because it'll block some of their views of Washington, D.C. But and I can appreciate that if you bought into that neighborhood with that wonderful view, you would think it'd be very unfair to have your view taken away from you by having a big building put up between you and Washington, D.C. But I guess I have less sympathy there than sympathy for those who feel like they're not going to have any parks to go to that are completely overwhelmed. And also heard concerns about the metro station there being super crowded if this many people are added to the neighborhood. So there are various sort of infrastructure, and schools too would be a concern. But anyway, that's not the purview of this commission, so I don't need to worry about those things. So it looks like, Andrew, you have your hand up.
Actually, I saw Alex's hand was up first.
Okay.
And then
Sure, thank you. I was just going to point out that we talked about exactly this issue when the Langston Boulevard plan came up, and we talked a lot about how that the increased density there had the very real potential of overwhelming the limited green space and park facilities there. So I don't think this is a new concern. It's probably going to be a continual one as the county further densifies. And we're a small county, and we've heard from county staff about how expensive it is to acquire new lands. I think Melissa's point about seeking out and using private spaces makes a lot of sense in this context. And we should, and getting back to the SPRC and some of these other committees that we're in, it might make sense for us to start really aggressively pushing on that, to strongly encourage the developer to add those sorts of facilities to their projects, with the knowledge that there's just not going to be room for everybody in what's already a pretty limited park system in some neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good points.
Andrew.
Yeah, while I do understand it's not necessarily the purview of this committee, I do want to say for the record that I am very unsympathetic to people who are irritated about density concerns. If people don't want to live with density, don't live in a city, don't live in one of the most car-free areas of the US, don't live in one of the more densely populated areas of the US. These new towers, these new buildings, they not only provide additional housing supply to make things more affordable, but they also provide property tax revenue that allow us to build these parks, allow us to maintain these parks. They allow us to maintain the infrastructure and public spaces where we live. And if we don't have the new development, if we aren't growing, we will be declining. And decline is much, much worse than growth. Decline means not enough money for updating infrastructure. Decline means not enough money for new parks or even to maintain the parks that we have. It is important that we grow. We're in a very high opportunity metro, and I think more people should have the chance to live here. And just because somebody bought an apartment quite cheaply in the 70s or 80s or in the 60s, when Rossland was a bunch of used car dealerships and other sketchy businesses from what I've read. Yeah. It does not necessarily mean that they should deny the opportunity to the next generation after them. So I think as much as much of our job is working with developers to ensure that there is adequate green space when new development happens, ultimately we need to be aware that the revenue for funding parks, it comes from having that new development. And we wouldn't have these new parks without the development. So that's my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm. Good points.
Erica.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that in terms of not just green space, but like recreation opportunities in like the Pentagon City, Crystal City area, I feel like there's a plethora of things to do around there. Just like someone said, the Longbridge Park is right there. We have the water park. There's like a climbing gym. There's trail access, like pretty like accessible trail access to like the Mount Vernon Trail and things like that. So I do wonder if it's overstated that that one park will be overcrowded because there are so many options of things to do outside of the home in that area. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, but I do agree that the demand for that field is overwhelming. It is huge. They could probably keep that field going 24 hours a day with soccer players alone.
Yeah. 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 Well, any other comments or suggestions? Points of view? Is anyone with their hand up, Marco, that I'm missing?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay.
Oh, Hamilton.
Other than maybe putting recreational facilities on the top of all those buildings would be really awesome.
That's a great idea. I'm going to add that to my list of questions for him.
I mean, I don't want to belabor this, but I know there has always been discussions within certain SPRCs and in certain sites, and I'm not sure if this was broached, Gary, related to dog facilities, and if they are going to be allowing dogs or pets as part of this development, and if they have any sort of idea of whether or not they will be accommodating any sort of pet-friendly infrastructure or recreational opportunities on site. That might be something else also to think about.
Okay, I've added that also. Good. These are all very helpful suggestions. Thank you all. Okay, I guess we thoroughly discussed this one. I don't want to monopolize time just for this project, so we should probably move on to any of the others that people want to speak about.
I know William provided some updates as part of his reports. I don't know, William, if you wanted to speak towards any of those.
Yeah, just real quick. Jill mentioned that we used to get updates from the 55 plus group, so reached out to them, and Jennifer said she'd be happy to do that. And then there was an interest in having a park foundation, so reached out to Fairfax, and we'll be chatting with them, and I'll update you guys after that.
Great, thank you.
With that, I think we can go back to our topic related to Eco Action Arlington. I believe Eleanor is on the call right now.
I think
and
Eleanor's
we'll
there.
invite her to speak.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, good evening. I appreciate the invitation. My name is Eleanor Hodges, and I serve as the Executive Director of Eco Action Arlington. And tonight, I appreciated the opportunity to talk about what we are doing for what is commonly known as the Tree Canopy Fund in Arlington County, and a funding request we've submitted to the county board. So I'm here to ask the Parks and Recreation Commission to support a funding request we have submitted for fiscal year 26, which would fund tree planting and maintenance for fiscal year 26. So for background, in 2007, the Arlington County Board authorized use of funds coming from commercial site plans to be used in the Tree Canopy Fund, which then was offered to community members for properties including single-family homes, townhomes, apartments, condos, places of worship, to plant trees. So this site plan process had a fee. So any commercial site plan that did not meet the requirements for tree planting was assessed a fee. That money went into the Tree Canopy Fund and then was then used for these purposes. As of last April, 2024, the Tree Canopy Fund has essentially run out of money. This fiscal year, the county board used one-time funding to put in $250,000 to continue the program, but that funding will expire this June. So we are currently advocating for additional funding to be allocated in FY 26. And some of the reasons for that is we feel with the new assessment of trees in the 2023 urban tree assessment, we have not yet met the 40% goal for tree canopy in Arlington, and having these funds available enables many people in the county to participate in improving tree canopy in their neighborhoods and properties. So we're looking for this momentum to continue, for their B2B funding allocated from this budget to continue the program, while we also seek ongoing secure funding, which could come from multiple sources, including increasing the fees assessed to developers in their site plans. So we are at this crux where we don't have the ability to continue offering trees unless we get an influx of funding We meanwhile are trying to educate people about what's going on with this popular program, how it impacts a lot of the work that we do in our community to make more trees available in our neighborhoods, and then also start to talk to more people, because I think ultimately what we're going to need to do is come up with creative solutions so that we can continue to get more trees in the ground across the county in all different ways to build our tree canopy up to the 40% goal. What I've provided, so I also appreciated the opportunity to talk to this commission. We've already talked to the Forestry and Natural Resource Commission, and I see Carolyn Haynes here. So thank you, Carolyn, for your leadership there. And what I wanted to do is outline what we've done in our current request, ask for the Parks and Recreation Commission support in this funding request, but also answer questions, because I do want to make sure that as we move forward in this pathway, that everybody in the leadership position, such as yours, are aware of what's happening with the fund, what's happening with the site plan process, how that's changed, and what we're going to be doing moving forth into the future. So in addition to the request to support our funding requests, I also wanted to leave time for questions on how the program works. So I'll also take the last few minutes to say that the fund was created in 2007. We've planted close to 4,300 trees through the Tree Canopy Fund. And then one of our most recent initiatives has also been to designate 13 neighborhoods as Tree Canopy Equity neighborhoods, where we're increasing support with staffing in those neighborhoods, and have also secured additional grants beyond the Tree Canopy Fund to support other programs, recognizing the higher need for the equity neighborhoods, which tend to have lower than average populations, or tree canopy, and higher than average populations of people living in poverty and people of color. So I think I can pause and take questions. I did want to allow time for questions because as we've been talking to more and more people in the community, more and more stakeholders, we're realizing that information sharing and talking to each other is important. So I wanted to make sure there was time for questions.
I do see Alex's hand is up.
Thank you, Marco. A couple of questions. First, has this happened before? Has the Canopy Fund run out of money before it should have for a fiscal year? And if it hasn't, what has happened here? Is it the program more popular than anticipated, or is there just not enough money coming in because we're not getting enough contributions from developers? What has caused this?
So this has only happened once before, and it was relatively early on in the process. Since then, there was a very large series of years where very large site plans with upwards of several $100,000 in payments came in successive years. And so we've been throughout that period kind of in a boom time period. And I think what's been happening, I would say, and again, I also want to speak to what I know and have heard, but I don't have the exact data. But my understanding is that since COVID, commercial development is down. I think we all know that. And so there haven't been any new site plans that have assessed fees for at least 12 months. And there are no current site plans on the horizon for the next 6 to 12 months. So I think in general, this is kind of the overall response to COVID, less commercial vacancies, et cetera. So this is new. We haven't ever had, except for the 1 year, which I think was in 2010, we've never had a year, I guess it's 2 in a row. This year, 2005, and next year, we don't have funding from commercial plans. So this is new. And so I think what we're looking at is a paradigm shift, and that might happen again. Commercial site plans might happen again. We might start to see more in that space, but not how I guess we had the 10, 12-year run where that was the sole source of funding for this program. So that I think that in my mind, the paradigm has shifted. With that being said, one other thing that we're looking at is that the fee has not changed since the county board authorized the fee per tree equivalent of $2,400. So I think another thing that we've been talking a little bit about is, do we also want to look towards, as site plans, they will happen in the future, making that amount higher so that if there are fees assessed, there would be more per tree assessed. So that would then offer the fund to get more contributions per site plan, if that makes sense. So it was $2,400 in 2007. The county board memo stated that there could be an increase for inflation. That hasn't happened. So, and then I think there's also the question of what would be the right value to, people have said it's not really a disincentive if it's only $2,400. So there's not a big disincentive for the developers. So there's a lot of pieces here. But I guess one of the things that we're talking about is, we want to talk about this conversation. We also want to talk about the fact that we want momentum and for the opportunity for trees to be planted to continue. So I think there's a little bit of a balancing thing we need to do. How do we keep momentum going, interest going in the community, while we also figure these things out and figure out what's the right pathway for there to be an ongoing permanent source of funding for this type of activity.
Thank you.
William, I think your hand is up.
Yeah, hi, Eleanor. Thanks for your briefing. I was also happy to see in the staff reports there were 600 trees planted in the fall, I guess by the county. How does your program interface with the county? Is this additional trees, places where they don't plant? I don't know enough about.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would need to see that report, but the county has a budget for planting street trees and trees in public property, and this fund plants trees on private property. So can somebody say that 600 was the county's number, probably for public?
That's what I saw. Yeah.
Okay, yes.
So this
and
is
so then the
private
county
property.
also usually includes in their numbers the trees planted in school property.
Okay, thank you.
Gary.
Well, first, thanks, Eleanor, for taking time out of your schedule to meet with us this evening to provide all this information. And of course, thank you to Eco Action for all the help it's provided over the years in planting trees in Arlington County. It's just been such a godsend to have Eco Action's help with that. Would you mind spending a little bit of time explaining the process that is followed for selecting the properties on which trees, private property in which trees are planted, and how the species is selected and things of that sort?
Sure. Let me start with the species because that's the first thing we do. So we're committed to planting all native species. We get guidance from the county foresters in which species to offer. Our criteria are typically large native species, but offering a little bit of variety because we want to have species that work well in different situations. We are doing 2 planting seasons. We offer one set of species in the fall and one in the spring. So they vary in the species that are appropriate to be planted at those times. So that's the selection process. We also respond to public demand, so we know there are certain species that are very popular. People ask for things. So we try to, I guess, within those constraints, come up with a list. And our goal is to have approximately 10 species available each planting cycle within those constraints. We're planting typically about 2-inch caliper trees. So they're also very large at the time of planting. Just for a little more information, the process to get a tree, it's done through an online application where people are expressing interest. And then the stipulations of the county board who set up the fund says that any site needs to be reviewed by a review committee that must include members of the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission, Eco Action Arlington staff, and county foresters. So every planting cycle after everybody who's interested has put in their applications into our online system. We then set up a review process where every single site is reviewed to make sure that the criteria we're looking for in simple are right tree right space so that anybody who wants a tree, there's the space for it, and that the species they've selected goes in that spot. So our overall goal is to get trees in the ground. So we're very, very rarely denying an application. What tends to come up is that somebody has asked for a tree that won't fit in the space they've asked. So some of the times review committee is coming back with, can you pick another species or can you pick another site? Another piece of the process is we're kind of actively trying to engage places where there is space. So typically those are places of worship and apartments where we want to plant trees. And that's a little bit slightly a different process, because then we're establishing relationships either through a resident, a neighbor, and then working with the property managers or the staff of the church or place of worship to work with them to help them figure out where there's trees. And so it's the same process. Again, we're figuring out where trees should go, making a map of that property and picking trees and figuring out what should go. They still go through the same process, but it's a little bit of a different process to get the application in, because we're supporting it and also providing guidance. We work very closely with the tree stewards who provide technical assistance. And then through our equity program, we're also trying to approach neighborhoods and apartments, low affordable housing apartments, places of worship, and some of the neighborhoods across Arlington where they don't have a huge church staff, to really support those and get more trees in the ground there. And again, that's a little bit of us approaching them wanting to work with us, but then the review process is all the same. Trying to think of anything else. We contract then after once the applications have been approved, we contract with a contractor, same contractor the county uses for their tree planting, Davy Trees, a very large tree company that's across the country. And then they put the trees in the ground after we place the order based on the applications.
Is there any priority provided to those applicants who live in underserved areas of Arlington?
Yeah, so that's one of the criteria for getting, and it kind of goes back to one of the previous questions, when there's been less funding, that's been one of the criteria for prioritizing applicants. There's been 1 or 2 years when we had to, couldn't give trees to everybody. So that was one of the criteria we used. In addition, so underserved neighborhoods, and then places in Arlington where the tree planted would shade a public sidewalk were some of the criteria we've used. And then we've gotten funding from grants to get staff to support the underserved neighborhoods. So that's one of the main things we're doing, recognizing, not everybody has time to go through the application process or figure all this out. So then that's what our grants and staff have been to support, is helping some of the neighborhoods that could use more support to get through the barriers to get their applications in. So that's the last piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Have you reduced this list of criteria to writing at any point, or?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
So you have these criteria. Do you have a written list of that encompasses all the criteria?
Yeah, so on our website, there's a program guidelines document, and I'd be happy to email it to you if that's helpful. So basically, we set up based on the county board memorandum that established this funding, we came up with, it's basically Arlington County Tree Canopy Program guidelines that list all the criteria. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple others. I didn't go into some of them that aren't as, don't come up as often, but resource protection areas is another area that if people want to plant trees in resource protection areas, if they happen to have a stream, those would be prioritized. That doesn't come up very often. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a few others. We also try to prioritize first-time applicants. So those are some of the others that are in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. If you happen to be able to.
Yeah, I can send that along so you can share it.
Marco, and we'll distribute among all the other commission members then.
Yeah, it actually also gives a very good, I guess, blanket overview of the entire program, especially because I'm feeling like I might not have gotten every single thing in my descriptions to your questions. So happy to share that.
Sure. Okay. I want to mention that I've been talking to a number of folks about the county on an ongoing basis, not a one-time funding, but an ongoing funding for the tree canopy fund. And, they pointed out that, okay, well, then you're shifting from the money coming from these developers to money coming from the Arlington County taxpayers. And we need to be careful about then who these trees are being provided free of charge. And maybe we need to be careful about not providing free of charge trees to people who can easily afford to buy the trees themselves. That sort of concern. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think I would agree that that's a priority of how we move forward, and how public funds should be used. I think we have to recognize, if there's a change being made, how quickly that's done and how it's done and how it's communicated. I certainly don't, think an expectation of past is a reason to continue something moving forward. But with that being said, we wouldn't want to thrust this upon people. I think the other audience is a tricky one, is stormwater utility applicants who are using these trees to help get there. Because we've been communicating very heavily through the guidance of the county again, and this was when the fund was coming from developers, but that people who wanted to get trees to meet the requirements for getting a stormwater utility fee waiver could apply for these trees. So again, I think it's about prioritizing what we want to do, communication, making sure it's clear and there's expectations. But I totally agree that we need to prioritize people who need these trees the most. With that being said, we're also looking at providing some funding for tree maintenance. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, but it is in our memo. A lot of people cite not being able to maintain their trees. Same exact thing that you were just saying, like that does tend to be people on fixed incomes or with limited incomes who can't do that. So that would be another thing we'd want to get money for. And I think all of those things should be prioritized before giving trees out to the general public. I think we could look at a cost share. We've done programs in the past where there's an incentive. So, some of the money comes from the property owner and some of the money comes as kind of a little bit of a carrot to the property owner. That's something that I think should be under consideration. And it was, for example, how the Stormwater Wise program worked. Wave to those that remember that program a while ago, where people who were doing rain gardens and permeable pavements and other things on their properties got a little bit of a kickback. Carrots are good to get people to do things. I guess it's the question of how much do we want to make, free and to whom, and then how do we want to manage the rest of the program. And I think Eco Action Arlington is going to come up with some opportunities for people to provide input on that. But there's a lot of stakeholders involved in this. So we'd want to be then carefully treading forward to how we move forward and how we communicate that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Alex, I think you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Gary. I agree that Eco Arlington Action should prioritize for all of those reasons that you just provided. But I am personally less concerned about if the funds are there, and of course that's why we're talking about this right now, about whether somebody might or might not be able to afford the tree on their own. I think adding to the tree canopy of Arlington is an absolute good, and it helps in a number of ways, many of which Eleanor just stated, and it helps us meet a lot of our other goals as well, including stormwater, which is getting more and more expensive for the county to manage. So while I agree in prioritizing in all these different ways that Eleanor just said, I'm less concerned about somebody who could afford a tree on their own slipping through and, planting a tree that the county provided on their land. So I'm happy if they do that. And we should be encouraging that in all kinds of ways, including this fund.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. Okay, any other questions for Eleanor? I don't see any. So, well, thank you again, Eleanor, and thank you also again to Eco Action. You guys have been tremendous in terms of boosting the overall tree canopy in Arlington County.
Well,
And,
thank you. I appreciate the
I
opportunity.
see
Everybody.
Hamilton's hand is up as well.
okay.
Just a quick data point here. Our goal is 40% tree canopy. Where are we now? Is it like 33% or something like that? I'm trying to remember the last data point I read. How
I thought
much
it was
more do we need to get
32.8.
to?
32.8
Okay.
is, I think, what it is.
Got it. So we need another 7.2% to get to the 40%. Or increase by about 25%. Okay, thanks.
All right. Well, good night. I'll have a great evening. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah.
Thank
Take
you so
care.
much.
Thank you. Okay, well, we should probably wrap this up here.
Yeah, that brings us to other business. Gary, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything related to letters or PRC recruitment.
Yeah, I think we've covered those things where we're looking for volunteers. The PRC recruitment, I believe Jill is going to be interviewing a candidate when she returns. And I guess you never know when one of you will leave us. So if anyone has any friend, colleague, acquaintance, anyone they know who you think would be a great addition to the commission, I think it'd be great if you could pass that on to Marco, and then we could pursue that. Because I think even adding one more, let's say the person that Jill is going to be interviewing ends up joining the commission, I think we're still below the maximum that we could have, Marco.
That's correct. Our commission can have up to 15, and we're at 12 right now.
Okay. And, obviously we don't have to be up to 15, but, we do have that option. So, Daniel, I look like you might have raised your hand for a second there.
Yeah, you both answered already. I was just wondering how many seats we have available.
Okay. Yeah.
Alex.
Yeah, how are we going to respond to Eleanor's request?
I think we're not going to take a vote tonight on it. And the reason for that is that there is an effort underway to form a group to come up with some recommendations on approaches that should be followed in dispersing funds from the tree canopy fund going forward. And I think Eleanor mentioned that Eco Action itself is going to be, coming up with some suggestions to sort of flesh out the criteria and other considerations that go into dispersing funds. And I think that would make everyone more comfortable with supporting the effort to dump a good chunk of money into the fund on an annual ongoing basis. So efforts are underway as far as I know, as we speak, to put a group of folks together. I hope they invite at least one person from this committee to participate. I have to assume there'll be representative or maybe two from the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission. And I'm sure they'll be pulling in tree stewards and master naturalists and other folks to help brainstorm some good criteria and approaches to follow in deciding where to put the trees and which species and all the other stuff that goes into figuring out how best and most productively to use the funds from the tree canopy fund. So that's why I think we're going to hold off for now. And I'm not the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission had prepared a draft letter supporting Eco Action's request. for funds that was sent to the board. But it's my understanding they are going to hold off on sending that letter in for the time being. And if that changes, I will immediately let you know. But that's the current status. And of course, I think FNRC probably, their view will carry a little bit more weight, given that they have, responsibility for, doing what one can even on private property. Anyway, I think we should kind of take our lead from them in terms of where to go with this. So again, another reason why I would prefer not to take a vote at this time until we have an opportunity to see how some of these things play out. Now, I appreciate that we can't take too long, because if you go too far down the road, you have much more limited options in getting money from the county. So hopefully this process will move along swiftly, and we can be back talking with you guys about it perhaps as early as our next PRC meeting. Okay, any other thoughts, questions on that topic, Marco?
No. I think the only other thing on the other business item is I did want to spend some time just fleshing out a little bit more the 2024 Bill Thomas Park Volunteer Award process for this year. So as I mentioned earlier, we're moving up that timeline. Our DPR communication staff has been doing a great job at trying to put the word out with flyers and with other printed media in the last week. We're actually moving forward with some digital publications and outreach to other groups in the next few weeks. So the request for nominees, I believe there is already a website up for that right now. That will be live this week all the way through, I believe, the beginning of March. I believe it's March 2nd. So there's going to be a good month and a half time period for that request. So if you have anyone that may know about, who they would like to nominate or encourage others to nominate a group or a person for this award, you can certainly do that and spread the word accordingly. I know Alex and Nelson participated in the selection committee last year. We will need 2 volunteers from the PRC this year as well. I don't think Caroline's on the call, but I know she will be participating as a previous winner for this year's committee as well, excuse me, as a staff member from DPR. The timeline for that selection committee process will be in March. Have probably around that month period to go through the proposed nominees, discuss them, and then come up with a recommendation back to the PRC for a vote in April. April will be our next virtual only meeting. So at that point, there will be a presentation or a discussion on the nominees and the final, I guess, nominee or selection from the committee, and then that discussion amongst the PRC, and then a vote amongst the PRC back to the county board, who will then formally recognize that winner at their May recessed county board meeting. And much like what was done last year, we will have that award recognition at that recessed meeting. We will have a reception where we will celebrate that person or that group. And then it'll actually be on the same evening that we will have our own Park and Recreation Commission meeting. So later on that night, we will also have our meeting as well. So just wanted to mention that is the process for this year, unless there are any questions.
Yeah. Alex, would you mind just taking a minute to explain the selection process you participated in? to give the others a sense of what that involves?
Of course. Nelson and I have been on this committee for the last 2 years. And basically what happens is there are nominations from the public. Last year we had actually quite a few, and they can be for individuals or for groups. And there is an agreed upon criteria that we use to rank the applicants in different categories. Many of the applicants are very strong candidates, and then we basically come up with a numerical value at the end. Talk a little bit about what we saw were strengths or weaknesses in the petitions, nominations, excuse me, and then come up with a winner among. In the past, it's been three commissioners to decide, and it, at least in the 2 years I've been doing it, the winner has been pretty obvious, based on the strength of the nominations that have been out there. They're all excellent applicants. So we have several new commissioners this year, and so for you folks who have come on in the last year, I think we need 2 people. And historically, we've tried to integrate new commissioners into this process. So you folks who have come on in the last year, check your calendars. Let Marco know. It is not a very large commitment. It really only takes. I take maybe in half an hour to an hour to review them all and to rank them ahead of the call. And then there's basically one call where we go through it. It's maybe 60 minutes tops to go through the applicants. We're really only talking about 4, 5, maybe, really. I mean, and then, yeah, then the staff person carries it forward from that. We vote on it ourselves. It's a very small commitment.
Okay,
Melissa, I
great.
see your
That's
hand
good.
is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think if you're newer to the commission, it's a really great commitment. It's also, again, not a huge commitment, just a couple meetings, and you get to see the different work done around the county. So I really strongly recommend doing it if you're newer to the commission.
Thank you. Okay, well, hope you guys think it over, and some of you volunteer to help out with that. That would be great.
And please let me know if anyone would like to still mull it over tonight, that's fine. Hopefully within the next week or so, we would like to have those 2 participants so that we can then move forward pretty quickly in March with that process. So if you have any interest, reach out to me or, oh, William, I see your hand is up.
I can do it. You guys,
Okay.
you guys guilted me.
I will warn you that if there are no volunteers, Jill will volunteer you.
You got one.
That's one. Is there any other taker?
It's always better to volunteer than be volunteered.
Yes,
I see
yes.
Claire's hand is up.
I'm happy to work with William on it as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right. I will then communicate that to Jerry and our comm staff. Thank you both for volunteering for that, and looking forward to this year's selection process.
It looked like Melissa's hand was up. I'm not sure.
No, I'm just a fool who didn't lower it. My bad. Thank you.
That's it for me, Gary.
Okay, well, let's wrap this up. Thank you all for your patience tonight. This meeting lasted a good bit longer than I anticipated. So thank you for hanging in there. I appreciate that. So, okay, Marco's already talked about our next meeting. And is there anything else we need to do, Marco, to wrap this up?
No, I think we can call this meeting to adjourn unless there are any other questions.
Okay.
Thank you much.
All
Great.
right.
Thank you, everyone.
Guys have a good rest of the evening. Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.